Moses is close to dying, and it says that he's very different than the way most people would die. His natural force is not abated. His eye is not dimmed. He seems to still have something left in the tank, I don't know if you ever get to the end of the day and say, I got nothing left in the tank. That happens. Other days you say, man, I still got a little bit in me. I can still do a little bit. I think that's the way Moses was. He still had something in him, but it was the time. God's going to call him home. God's going to take him home. And there's something very unusual about the way God deals with Moses is that God buries Moses. And I don't know if you've ever walked through that process. Some of you have, to pick out a place, to pick out all the things that go along with dying. God took care of all the details and said that no one else knew where he was buried at. So it's just very unusual. I have some thoughts about why that is, I guess, but chapter 31, Moses knows that he's leaving. He's going to pass on, and his successor has already been named. It's going to be Joshua. Joshua's been his servant, a servant of the Lord, but also a servant to Moses for all these years. And I don't know, it's been some time has passed, but we kind of walked through Joshua's life and how he was doing this, and then he was doing this, and just how God's growing him through all the different occasions of his life. And we weren't privy to like the day-to-day stuff. There's day-to-day things God's always doing with us, but there were like high points. We got to glimpse in, look a little bit, and he had a love for the tabernacle. He didn't leave the tabernacle. He wanted to be there where God was at. And so chapter 31 is a charge to him. I got a charge when I was ordained about being a pastor. And this is a charge to him. He's going to be the leader of a nation. And so he's stepping kind of out of the shadows, so to speak. He's been around, but he's no longer going to be a servant. He's going to be the face. He's going to be the leader. He's going to be the, today we talk about people that are influencers and all those kinds of things. And so it's a big thing to be a leader of a nation. And so he's going to do it. And he's had good training. He's been around somebody that knows what they're doing. Moses knew what he was doing. Chapter 32, of all things, chapter 32, does anybody know what chapter 32 is without looking at your Bible? It's Moses' song. It's a song. And it is, we don't have the music to it, but if you go back and read Deuteronomy 32, it's a powerful thing about God and uplifts the Lord and brags on the Lord. It's quite a chapter. And so we get to chapter 33, where we're going to be at here just for a few minutes. And chapter 33 is these blessings. And towards the end of Genesis, Israel blesses his sons, the 12 sons that he has, and each son got a blessing. And so Moses is at the time that he's going to bless these tribes, not just individual men, but whole tribes he's going to bless. And these blessings are coming in the shadow of Moses' soon death. I'm sorry. The blessings on each of these tribes comes in light, though, of something very plain in verse number 1. It says, and this is the blessing wherewith Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. And he said, the Lord came from Sinai and rose up from Seir unto them, and he shined forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of saints from his right hand, and from his right hand went a fiery law for them. Yea, he loved the people. All his saints are in thy hand, and they sat down at thy feet. Every one shall receive of thy words. Now I'm going to really key in on verse number 3, but verse number 3 is built on the foundation of verse number 1. Verse number 1, Moses takes us back to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is where God revealed himself to Israel. the light of that revelation changed the nation. God showed himself to them, showed himself that he is their God. He reminds them in different places, I am the Lord thy God. I am the Lord your God. I'm your God. You're my people. And I'm watching out for you. There are things that I expect of you. There's accountability, responsibility that you have. And he says also, there are things that you can expect from me. I'm going to fulfill my promises to you. I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. And so he explains some of that in those first two verses. And then he gets to verse 3, and he drops this in and shows us something here. He tells us something about himself in a very tight little package. You know, when I worked at a facility down south of here, it was a Japanese-owned company, and I'd watch some of the Japanese men come in for lunch, and they would untie a bandana and open up a box. Is it a bento box, I think? They'd open up that box, and it was like a little treasure chest of stuff in there. Little bitty, delicate kind of things, that just all kinds of things packed in that box. I was always curious about what was in the box. I tried not to let them see me looking, but I was watching them eat lunch, you know. And if they would watch me eat lunch, they'd see bologna sandwich, Little Debbie, bag of chips. They're probably not too interested in that, but I was always interested in what was in the box. It always seemed like a lot of stuff was in there. It always seemed like there was more stuff in there than it could have fit in that size box. So there's a lot stuffed in there. And so in verse number 3, there's a lot that God has stuffed in to verse number 3. The first thing he says there, that first sentence or that first phrase, he says, yea, he loved the people. He loved the people. And so that's a lot, I think. It says something about God, that there is a divine love there. That word there, loved, has this thought of to hide as if in the bosom. It's to cherish. It's a tender embrace. One of the things I was reading explained it this way. It's like folding the people into his heart. He brought them as close as he could get them. He just wrapped them up. I don't know if you had maybe a big old pudgy aunt maybe, and she would just get a hold of you and she'd just start wrapping you up, and you just kind of just fall into her, you know, and just keep coming in closer and closer. And this is God's just folding you into his heart. And so this act of loving us, or loving Israel, particularly there, literally Israel, if we could understand this, that word loved, doesn't have a past, present, or future sort of thing about it only, but it is continuous and perpetual. It is ongoing. There is no ending to it. There is no finish to it. A lot of times at a wedding, I'll hold up the ring if they use rings, and typically people have a ring, and I'll say some things about the ring on the lady or the man that hands it to me, and typically I'll hold the ring up and I'll talk about how it is made of a certain metal, and then I'll talk about what it symbolizes, and I'll hold it up and I'll talk about how you can't find any end to it. It is a complete circle, and there's no beginning or end to it, and that's the way it is with God's love. It is always there, always around us, always embracing us. And so this is sort of a little list here in verse number 3. There's 3 things that we're going to see, but at the top of the list is the fact that he loved the people. And the things, when dealing with God, they very much are, the thing at the top of the list is the most important thing. It's the thing. In the fruit of the Spirit, the first fruit that is mentioned, can you guess what it is? It's love. And so God reminds us again here, not only is he producing love in us, but he is showing us his love first. And so he wants us to get that, to know, look, you are loved by me. 1 John 4:19 says this, we love him because he first loved us. And so I'm glad he loved me. I'm glad he loved me in spite of who I am or what I am, what I've done. He's loved me. There's a lot of modern day sort of scholars and Bible theologians. They would tell you that when you look at the Old Testament, you're looking at a God that's a very wrathful God. And you're going to read through some passages as you're going through the Old Testament, in the march through the Old Testament, you're going to find some passages where the wrath of God fell. Fire and brimstone fell upon Sodom and Gomorrah. There were people that experienced the heavy hand of God. The justice of God fell. The judge of all the earth, the hammer came down. And so there are times where God would deal with a whole nation with a very wrathful hand. But I want you also to understand this, that is not the only thing, because Moses is ending his walk through life and his incredible ministry that he had, and he finds that although God is a God of justice and a God of vengeance, God is very much still and always will be and has been a God of love. God is love. And so he loved the people. And so that ought to do something for them. They're about to be called to do something very difficult. He doesn't take them into the locker room for like a pep talk. I mean, this is kind of like that, I guess. He doesn't get them ramped up about how fierce they ought to be. He says, I want you to know this, first out of the gate, as you deal with these difficult things, I'm going to die. You're going to have a new leader. You're going to take possession of a new land. You're going to conquer some nations to have the land. It's not going to be an easy journey. But he said, I want you to know this. I love you. I love you. As difficult as it may be, I want you to know I love you. The second thing he takes them through, he says, in verse 3, he said, yea, he loved the people. All his saints are in thy hand. And so we have God's people in his heart, and we have God's people in his hand. And so you have divine love, and then you also have divine security, this guardian care that is taking place. I'm always moved when I see it in action, and if you've never watched it much or didn't know much about it, there is a place called the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And there is a constant guard there. There's somebody that stands vigil. They never leave. They're always on their post. And there's stories about how during the course of inclement weather, hurricanes, snowstorms, that they've not left their post. I think it was quite a thing that there was a very severe situation. They pulled somebody off their post for just a very short time, and that was like a newsworthy event because they were not going to be on their post for just a short period of time. You know, somebody that is better at what they do than even the guard of the unknown soldier, and there's a name for them, is God himself. God is always on his vigil. He is always watching. And we are so close that we're in his hand. It says there, his saints are in thy hand. And there's kind of a misunderstanding today about what a saint is, that the Roman Catholic Church has to vote on who a saint is. Look, when you got saved, you became a saint. You are a saint today if you know Christ. I read something that really made sense to me. A man or woman that has answered his love with love, that echoed back, God's love came and I loved him back. I wanted to be his. I responded to that love. I said yes to his love. I turned from my sin. I turned from what I was and I came to him. I became a saint that day. And when I became a saint, not only did it change who I was, it changed where I was. I went from being a child of darkness, having no one to guard me in a sense, to a place where I'm in his hand. I was knit to God. I don't know if you've ever played with a magnet or not. I used to love to find magnets and tear them out of old radios, out of speakers and stuff, and play with them, and pick things up with a magnet. And sometimes the magnet would pick up, the pieces of metal, and it would leave behind anything else that was not metal, that was plastic or living things. So you'd run the magnet over and pick things up, and it would pull that to itself. It'd pull the metal to itself, but it would draw it away from other things. And that's what God did with us. He loved us. We responded in kind, love back to Him. We said yes to Him. And the magnet of His love drew us in, knit us to Him, and separated us from evil. It's helping us to be pure and holy. And so God's doing that. The fact that we're in His hand, it implies submission, that I'm willing to be there. I'm not trying to fight to get out. Maybe there's been times where you needed to discipline your kids, and you said, if I could just get my hands on you. You're chasing, working after them, trying to get hold of them. But we've submitted ourselves. We want to be in His hands. And there ought to be a submission that would say, anywhere, Lord. Anywhere, anyhow. And to be done with, you can do anything with me when I'm in your hand. To be in your hand, not just talking about safety, but the submission of that, safety, submission, and then the service that we have in His hand. In His hand, I'm able to serve Him. And when I serve Him, safety, submission, and service, I have the satisfaction of a life lived with great purpose. Unfortunately, there are people that they live their life every day. They're grinding it out. They have nothing that they're really living for, just to go to work another day, to get a paycheck, to buy the food. They buy the food so they get the paycheck, they get the health. It's what they call it, the rat race, I'm living the rat race. I'm living the grind. That's not the way we live our life. Our life is different. I have the satisfaction to know I'm living my life as best I know how. Failure, yes. Some days not the way they ought to be, but for the most part, I'm satisfied that I'm trying to do what God wants me to do. There's something very fulfilling about that, to be in His hand. And so God's people in His heart, God's people in His hand, Look at verse 12. I want to read a verse for you. Verse 12, it says there, talking about Benjamin, it says that of Benjamin, he said, the beloved of the Lord shall dwell in safety by him, and the Lord shall cover him all the day long, and he shall dwell between his shoulders. And so the Lord says, I love you. I want you to come close. I want you to come here by me. Come here and be by me. Dwell around me, with me. And there's safety in all that. And then let me give you the last thing. It says in verse 3, yea, He loved the people. All His saints are in thy hand, and they sat down at thy feet. Every one shall receive of thy words. And so God's people at His feet. Did you get that? God's people in His heart, God's people in His hand, and God's people at His feet. That last little phrase there, at His feet, and then it says, everyone shall receive of thy words. That goes together. That makes up one picture. At His feet, you're going to receive His words. There's a New Testament picture, a literal event that took place, that if you'll think about sitting at the feet of Jesus, who was the person sitting at the feet of Jesus? Does anybody remember? Mary was sitting there. Martha was consumed with much doing and cumbered about with trying to keep the kitchen, the meal going. And Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus. And the Lord talks about how that's the greater work there. And so there's something about obedient students receiving from the Master, getting what they ought to get. And so the teacher, the Master, is standing teaching, and the learner, they're both engaged in this process. The learner has to be submissive, obedient. He needs to be in his place at the feet of Jesus, submissive, listening to the Lord, receiving his word. As he receives it, he uses it. And as he uses that, God can give him more. And so there is something on our part to receive from God. But there's also, with a good teacher, the teacher's involved in the process. The teacher of a class can watch, and you can see when the interest flags. You can see when people are like, they're not getting this. They don't understand it. You got to come at it a different direction. You got to explain it. Maybe that illustration wasn't a good illustration. So, well, let me explain it this way, or let me give you another example of that. Let me help you with that. And so, a good teacher would do that. Jerry taught for 79 years, 80 years. I don't know how many years you taught. How many years were you a teacher?
I was in education 42 years.
42 years. And so you learn a few things about how to teach a class. And so a good teacher will incorporate methods for the learner to learn. Don't you know, we have the greatest teacher there ever was teaching us in the Lord. And the Lord knows how to give each student the individualistic care. Boy, that was tough coming out. In my mind, I see the word, but I can't say it. That individual training that every child ought to get. Every child doesn't learn the same way. Same way in God's family. And God's able to direct it exactly the way we need to hear it, the way we need to get it. And so he's a patient teacher. I'm so glad that when I sit at his feet, he's not aggravated with me all the time. He's not frustrated with me. He's not just angry at me. You need to get this, just pounded it into our... That's not the way the Lord teaches. And we're anxious to learn at his feet there. Look, you cannot separate God from truth. God is the fountainhead of truth. It flows from him. You say, I need truth for my life. Sit at the feet of God. Sit at the feet of Jesus, and you're going to get it. The Lord said in John chapter 8, verse 12, he said this. He said, he that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. And so, I don't know that I understand all of this the way it said this, but there is a thought in this that it's not just sitting at his feet, but it is following at his feet. He said this in John chapter 10, verse 4. It says, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. So it's not just that we're just sitting there somehow passively connected to him. We are actively following him on the path, following on the journey. I'm following at his heels. If you've ever had a dog or seen a dog like this, and a farmer walking through the fields, and the dog is just right there at his feet, just right there coming, always coming along behind him. And the same thing with a shepherd and the sheep. They just constantly at his feet, just following his feet. That's a good way to live your life with the Lord. If you're close enough to him, he's going to turn around, and there's going to be occasions where he's going to speak to you. And if you're close enough, Alexander McLaren said, if you're close enough, there's times where you're going to hear him whisper. You can hear God whisper to you. And that's what we want. We want God to whisper to us. But some people are following so far off, they never see his movement. They never see his hand. They never see his feet. They never hear his voice, and they're wandering around in life, and they have no guidance. They have no light. They have no clue about the will of God. I was so convicted about this, about my own search for what I ought to do at times, that if I was closer to him, it'd be easier to see what I need to see. It says in Psalm 32, verse 8, it says, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. I will guide thee with mine eye. How do you do that? You just, it's like a movement. It's just like it's an unspoken sort of way of communication that God says, if you're in tune with me, if you're walking with me, abiding with me, He can look at something, we can know that's what I am to do next. I'm just the look of it. You ever done that with somebody? You just like, there it is, right there. Just, what should I do? And you nod right there. You follow their eye, and oh, there it is. That's what I should do next. God's people in His heart, God's people in His hand, God's people at His feet. That is the way to live this life, honestly. God help us to do that. You know, we need to do that better. I need to do that better. So anyway, I'm going to close with that. Yep.
The Bible says Paul sat at the feet of Gamaliel.
Mm-hmm.
Gamaliel was a great teacher.